One of the ways we have used to represent relationships quite a bit is with a table. And so let's work on using a table to tell whether or not a relationship is a function. So normally when we have looked at a table, we've had the table divided into X and Y. And this time we've got the table showing us inputs and outputs. Not really a big deal that we've labeled them differently because typically X is the input and Y is the output. I would say 99.99% of the time, X is the input and Y is the output. So even though these are labeled input and output, we can still think of them as being X and Y. Now, hopefully you remember the definition of function is each input is assigned to exactly one output. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at these tables and see, do we have anything in the input column that is assigned to more than one thing in the output column? Now, one of the advantages of trying to find a functional relationship from a table is that if we look at the input column and we do not see any number repeated, meaning we don't see any number twice in the input column, we automatically know it's going to be a function, because in order for an input to be assigned to more than one output value, it would have to show up more than one time in the input column. So for example, when we look at this first table, I see an input of 5 that's matched up with 7, 10, 15, 20, and 25. And I know that that is a function because none of my inputs appear more than one time. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. None of those appear more than one time. So it's impossible for me to have an input assigned to more than one output because I don't have an input showing more than once. So this is a function. If my explanation there confuses you a little bit, let me show you how I could make this not a function. Let me just add one more row onto the bottom to make this not a function. Let me put a 5 right there, and then I'm going to put in the output something besides a 7. It has to be something besides a 7 because the very first row up here has got 5, 7. So if I put another like 5, 7, it's still a function because I've got an input assigned to the same output, right? So that's still okay. But if I do something besides 7, in fact, let's be silly, let's just put 7.1. There we go. Now it's not a function anymore because I have the number 5 appearing twice in my input row. It's not a function now because here's a 5 and here's a 5. The 5 shows up twice, so now I have two inputs that are assigned to different outputs. One of those 5s is assigned to 7, and the other one's assigned to 7.1. Now it's not a function. Okay, let's look at our second row here, our second table, excuse me. So I'm looking through the input column. Do I have any inputs that appear more than one time? And the answer is yes, I do. I've got an input of 1 showing up twice. 1 goes to 10, and 1 goes to 4. So this is not a function because I have the input value of 1 assigned to two different outputs, as assigned to an output value of 10 and an output value of 4. If I were to draw this as a mapping diagram, I would have the 1, 5, 4, and 7, my inputs, and then I would have the 10, 8, 6, 4, 2 as my outputs. And then whenever I drew my arrows, the arrow going from 1 would go to 10, and it would also go to 4, just like that. Now the rest will be fine. 5 goes to 8, 4 goes to 6, and 7 goes to 2. The rest of it's fine, but because that number 1 goes to two different outputs, it's not a function. So tables are really, really easy to tell if something's a function or not. You just look at the input column and see, do I have any inputs that occur more than once? And then check and see if I do have an input, probably it's not a function, but then are the outputs different? In this case, yes, the outputs were 10 and 4, so not a function.